from the book The Politics of Language by David Beaver and Jason Stanley. The quote at the beginning of this chapter is as follows: "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim." This is a quote by Elie Wiesel, and he said that quote during his Nobel Prize acceptance speech. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist.
Phil Phails for you. No, he's I guess you would say he's a human rights activist. He and he's a novelist, actually best known as a novelist.
Okay.
Really. He had a fascinating and difficult life history. He, as a child, was in a concentration camp and managed to escape the Holocaust alive. He became a refugee. I wish now I'd checked up on his life.
Checked up on him. It's okay.
It's fine. But he left Europe as a refugee and got into Israel, with the bulk of his family dead, like so many, and he made his home in Israel and continued to write, I think largely in French, originally French and English, and his books are, he's well known as an author, but he died a few years ago, within the last 10 years. So if just to continue with Wiesel, he's a fascinating case for a reason. An Israeli friend of mine pointed out last year to me. So Wiesel talks there in a way that's often quoted about the importance of not remaining neutral in the face of oppression. Now, Wiesel, after moving to Israel, not surprisingly, was an ardent Zionist. What else could he be? That was defining for him, that he had a place to be safe and where he thought Jews could be safe. So during his life, during the last 30 years, especially of his life, as we know, there was a lot of conflict between Palestinians and Jews.
It's relevant right now. Yeah.
It continues to be relevant. And among the things that happened were people losing their homes, not being able to earn a living in the way they had been before, and being subjected to various other forms of oppression, sometimes dying.
Yeah.
Sometimes
not being able to move freely. Right. Seems like we're talking about the Palestinians there.
Absolutely. And so while I don't want to throw labels around that are themselves not neutral, I think it's fair to say that there were people that were suffering throughout that time.
Yeah.
And that there were power asymmetries at various points where, whether or not there were good reasons for Israeli policy to be as it was, it's nonetheless and we talked about Israel last time.
We did, I remember.
It's nonetheless the case that there were people who were suffering, who were clearly oppressed. And so many within Israel, many Jews within Israel who were sensitive to problems created by Israeli policy on, for example, settlement, tried to get Wiesel to speak out, because they said, look what you said, Elie. You said that we should never be silent.
Yep.
Yeah. Wiesel refused throughout his adult life to speak out on this issue.
Really? Because of his Zionist leanings.
So here
I'm
you're asking
guessing.
me to absolutely, you're asking me to interpret
Oh, yeah.
why a Nobel Prize winner, known for his work on peace, his Nobel Peace, why he chose not to speak out.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm not qualified to
Right.
tell you, but I think my what I would imagine, it would be the same as you would imagine, that his perspective didn't allow him to see a a picture of the people that were suffering as being the same in that conflict, as being in any way parallel to the picture of suffering that he'd experienced personally. His own personal perspective didn't allow him to see those as the same, which is not to say they are the same, but many people have in fact seen them as being the same. So it's certainly possible to see those as being comparable. And then again, it's very problematic when people do make comparisons like that. So problematic, that is to say, not merely in the sense of that might be unfair or inaccurate, but also in the sense that people get into trouble when they make those comparisons.
Yeah. The thought I've had of some of those with regard to comparison is like in Poland, they had these areas where they confined all the Jewish people. It
Right.
was called, do you remember what it was called? It was in
You
Warsaw.
mean in Warsaw, the Warsaw Ghetto,
Yeah, the
basically?
ghetto.
Yeah,
And I've thought about parallels between that because they would restrict supplies from going in there
sure.
and the people starved in there. If I
Right,
believe the things that I've read and watched in movies, it was a horrible place. But they
right.
had a lot of people and kids and folks trying to
Sure.
live a life inside of this ghetto, thinking life could go on around a ever tightening kind of noose or
Right.
restrain of supplies and the things that are necessary for life. And then I think about a place like Gaza or the West Bank and thinking, are these people in a similar situation?
Right. And so many people have, um, t- you know, looked at the question of whether it's fair to make a comparison or not.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's Masha Gerson who's spoken most vividly about this, and uh, uh, as a historian has studied the issue and made I can find references for you later if you want to put them up on a website,
Yeah.
but made a clear case for why it's why it would be reasonable to at least look at the question
Mm-hmm.
of what's similar and what's different.
Yeah.
But for many people, um, that mentioning these things in the same conversation is already a step too far because these are emotive issues. One cannot have a neutral discussion of whether there's an analogy or not, because the moment you mention either issue, people's emotion takes over.
Dysregulated.
And when
Narrowness
you
of focus.
when you try to make any when you raise the question of whether one might usefully compare them, you get to a point where people are even more ruffled is an understatement,
Yeah.
angry.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're speaking from their animal brain then. They're not using the
Well,
well, when
I don't
emotions take
think
over,
it's
you're
it's emotions, but there's also some strategic reason why engaging in certain types of discussion can be problematic. Let me give a very different example.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, hold on. Before you do that, did Wiesel ever change
No,
his tune? He
no.
never did. I was hoping that there'd be like at
When
the end of
Wiesel
his,
died, he had not, to my
he
knowledge,
never said
spoken
anything.
out. I can't say he never said anything, but there's no
Right.
major public record. And how would I know what he actually thought and what he said behind closed doors? my point here was simply the observation that the guy that I've taken as a champion of
Yeah. Not
not
standing on the fence.
not standing on the fence, refused to speak out on an issue that many of his contemporaries in Israel thought was the defining issue of the day, and many of his compatriots thought was exactly the type of situation he had described as requiring speaking out.
Yeah, because
And
there's
so,
an oppressor and a victim.
absolutely. So the
Clearly.
conclusion we can draw is that Nobel Prize winners, Peace Prize winners, they're human too.
They're human too.
And when we're deciding whether we should speak out on an issue, or complaining about someone else for either speaking out or failing to speak out,
Right.
we should keep in mind that they're human.
Compassion and empathy is what you're
We can
inviting.
can still hate them, but
What good
we're
is that?
hating a human being if we decide to do that.
Yeah.
We're criticizing a human being for being human.
Their
And
motivations for not speaking out are, if it's not alien, it's human to me.
absolutely.
And so there's we understand, if unable to find that common ground, we could understand how they got there.
We can try.